correctly with the correct amount.
D20 Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Welcome to Me and Steve Talk RPGs, a podcast where me and my friend Steve try and help you get the most out of your role-playing game experience. Hey folks, what's up? Welcome to Me and Steve Talk RPGs. I'm here tonight with Steve.
What's up, Steve?
Hey, and we're going to talk about some RPGs, or RPG stuff, or maybe something completely different, but...
I don't know. All of the above, probably.
Well, as Ben told us after having met us at Gamer Nation Con, yes, I have met your attention span, but just briefly.
Right.
But before we get into all the rambling for this week, what's our podcast of the week this week, Steve?
Our podcast for the week this week is The Forge.
Ooh, The Forge.
Yeah.
Yeah, Hooli and Chris.
Yep.
Everything you ever wanted to know or thought you might need to know about Genesis and creating stuff for it. Little Birdie has told me that there is a new episode very soon to be released. And yeah, well, and Hooli's an honorary Steve, so.
Right, exactly.
So
that'll be a good time.
Mm-hmm. And of course, you know, like if you're looking for other gaming podcasts, there's a ton of them on the D20 Network site. So go check that out. Check out the blog and all that other fun gaming goodness.
Oh, yeah. Well, we put out a call to action this week for a show topic, but right before you posted the call to action independently, Blue Nova sent me a message.
Mm-hmm.
And it went, hey, listen to the latest episode and was curious if you had or want to expand further on character advancement that isn't mechanical or stat-based. Looking more so for, like, narrative-based advancement. And you hit post on the thing as I finished reading that.
You sent me the DM about it.
Yeah. So we're going to pick that first, and then we're going to work through the list of things, because I saw we got a ton of responses for Patreon questions. Mm-hmm. And that's great. That helps us a lot, because it's hard sometimes for us to keep coming up with new topics.
Yeah, well, it's just, yeah, like there's stuff you want to talk about, but it's like, well, we kind of talked about that, and then it's kind of close to this, or, you know, and then, you know, I need to work on, or, you know, maybe we've got something like that we're going to talk about with a guest that's coming up that I haven't got scheduled yet, or, you know, because I am working on getting some more people scheduled.
Well, we've both sort of been in a bit of a weird flux at this point anyways.
Well, you know,
so
just earlier this afternoon, I was putting a new motor in my air conditioning unit. So
yeah, exactly. But yeah, so like I said, we're going to work through those eventually, but back to the question at hand. I think flavor advancement's great. I personally believe that it's better to start with a blank slate character and then develop a backstory for them as the adventure continues, versus actually dedicating a backstory and then adventuring, because oftentimes the story that you tell from playing the game is way more fantastical than the one you came up with, at least in my experience.
Yeah. And having seen you kind of do that, I get what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, I think, so to speak, narrative advancement is, for lack of a better word, the point.
Well, yes. Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I tend to agree with you in that way, but I think sometimes people are looking for, I don't know, they're not looking at the bigger picture, right? They're looking at their character going, how did my character narratively develop out of this? And I don't know how to, I don't know as a GM how to express that a character has grown. I think it's all mostly up to the players.
I think, yes, it's because I think that growth or advancement is something that the player should be expressing. So, I I mean, I don't know how you encourage it. Definitely as a GM, I'm not entirely sure how you would do that other than, thinking about how does the world react to them.
Right. Right.
And as much as it's not generally my flavor of gaming, I feel like fantasy is kind of the easiest one to point to with this. Like, as your characters advance, mechanically and through the story, and to a certain point, this is going to happen. I think Cyberpunk has that mechanic that no one really ever uses called reputation. Um, where it's supposed to affect how NPCs react to you, etc. It's more like you can put a score down there. But I don't think I think trying to track it like a score is
What kind of defeats the purpose, but I think
yeah,
I think you could do so. Sidebar. I think you could do a really interesting cyberpunk story if you made your players use that,
probably.
because you could get to this point where if your players pick up on it, they're dumping points into that and going, I'm building an army.
Fair. Yeah. Yeah.
Which I think could be a really interesting cyberpunk game.
But there is a narrative advancement for you right there. Just
Right.
I'm building an army.
Right.
So your
Well,
character is trying to,
I think the funny thing is that I think the way to do it would be to make the campaign not revolve around that and see if your players pick up on the fact that, like, you encourage them to use that reputation stat.
mhm.
It's more so what I'm driving at. But
Yeah. So again, this kind of crosses between mechanical and narrative, but I've heard it posited that the obligation mechanic in Star Wars can be used, so to speak, two ways. That, like, if you're trying to cut a deal with, some Huts or other crime lords, that if you don't already have enough obligation, they're just going to be like, you're small potatoes. I'm not dealing with you. Where, so I think that's where I think you need to, as a GM, think about, what may the world have found out about the deeds of this little band of miscreants, which is, let's be honest, what most parties end up being in some form or other. They may be well intentioned, but they're often, not, paragons of virtue, if you will.
right.
But I think, there's going to be some sort of renown or reputation that this crew develops, or, hey, did you hear about the people that did XYZ? Oh yeah, that was us. Oh, that was you. And play off that. But I think that's, like, boy, I just feel like that's kind of just the way that the story should work, that actions have reactions and consequences, and both good and bad, right? Because I think too many times when people say actions have consequences, we think of that only in the undesirable side of the comment,
Right.
you know. And I'm not at all saying that, like, I don't think, I think tracking it like in, like, the World of Warcraft with the reputation scores. I'm sure you played at some point, and but you have these different factions and you can gain rep with them, and if your rep gets so high, you can get, special tabards or blah 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 blah.
Right. Right.
Well, I feel like that kind of thing, or even how and actually maybe this is because I don't remember it actually being a score, but remember, you ever played Sid Meier's Pirates?
Yes. Yeah.
Remember how you could build or lose favor with the different, like the Dutch or the French or the
Right. Right.
Spanish,
Yes.
depending
Yeah.
on. I think that's kind of the thing you want to shoot for is, well, you did a favor for this group, so they
Yeah.
like you.
They
But
like you, so now you have. Yeah.
but I think, that's more on the party as a whole. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on how you might do it for individual characters?
Um, it's kind of it's it. Hmm. So I think it would work in something like Star Wars, or let's say you're playing Cyberpunk, and you're setting it in the canonical setting at the canonical setting time that like the book follows, right? So you're not any farther ahead or any further behind. You could, in theory, use characters from the book and be like, okay, you have favor with these people as a character. Maybe they do something particularly good for I don't know, one of the Arasaka reps or something, one of the named ones in the book. And so that particular character has favor with that rep. You know, it's one of those type things. I think you could do that. You just have to, it would have to be like, it wouldn't be any of the settings we like to really dig our teeth into, which are those, you know, sort of homemade generic settings.
Well, but I think you can.
Even with that, you could maybe say to, maybe you could ask your GM and be like, hey, I'm making a character. Are there any of this type of person in this world, and what do they mean to it? And maybe your GM will pick up like, oh, well, maybe I should build something around that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's weird because I feel like it's what should happen, but I'm struggling to think of how to say it. Other than I think that some of it goes to a living world, not just only things happening where they're at. You know, and I think that it got mentioned somewhere that, you know, what about, you know, getting gear or, you know, followers or whatever. I feel like the gear thing is an advancement. I mean, some games, you know, Cyberpunk is a gear heavy game.
Right.
So yeah, as they advance and become better at what they do, they should be getting money to get better toys.
Right.
But I don't think you want to fall into the loop 100% either that, like, I think it was when we talked with Eddie Webb about Pugmire, how, you know, the basic loop for D&D is kill stuff, get loot, you know,
Right.
trade loot in for better weapons, go kill bigger stuff, you know, and just
yeah, I think that works in certain games, but yeah, I agree that in most games that doesn't swing quite that way. I think that particular loop works really well in like a mecha game, but that's a thought.
well, yeah.
But no, I get where you're coming from, that like gear as an advancement is maybe also like just you telling your story some more as well. Which is interesting.
Yeah, it's I mean, there's a lot of stuff you can do, but I guess maybe too, could you give them stuff that, okay, so maybe gear technically, right? But maybe they get a signet ring from a lord in a more fantasy or medieval setting.
Mm-hmm.
You know, something like that. A piece of gear that doesn't have necessarily a statistical bonus or whatever,
gives them some favor or
some clout, maybe.
some narrative clout. Okay, I see what you're saying. That would work really good too.
You know, I mean, you know, anything like that. You know, a signet ring or like, you know, even in Cyberpunk, maybe it's a gang patch.
Right.
You know, something like that. I mean, yeah, it's going to definitely require, if you're doing it something like that, I think it's going to require some work on the GM side to set stuff up, but I don't think that's a bad thing.
And I don't think it takes a lot of work. Like it's pretty easy to, unless you're planning on telling a completely different story, but you got to figure that, see, that's the thing, is that like as a GM, you got to figure that your players are going to tell the story that they want to tell. You're just going to give hooks around that. And like if your players are coming to you and going, hey, or a player is coming to you and going, hey, I'd like to do this narrative thing, why not indulge their narrative thing and see if you can tell an interesting, you know, tie it in some way. Because I've seen so much. I'm really, you know, I laugh, and it's, you know, everybody says that campaign doesn't survive first contact with players, right? But it's like, that's not necessarily, like, I feel like that's such a narrow-minded mindset. But anyways, it's a completely different episode. But yeah, I think being part of that narrative as a GM is exciting and fun. And I would jump on something if my players came to me and was like, I want to do this. That's why I usually like, I have a player now that had some really interesting ideas, and he's like, you just keep saying yes. I'm like, yeah, because they're cool and I want to see what you do with it.
Yeah, and I think that's at some point, I think saying yes to your players is good just because it encourages them to give you more ideas.
Well, yeah.
Not just in the context of yes, they're having fun, but just it gives you more ideas and I know your brain works a lot like mine in that regard where okay, they want this, so I can do this with it and twist this part this way and
Hmm?
and I think I know as a player, if I kind of throw a tidbit to the DM and the DM takes it and run with it, now I'm like, ooh, they like my idea. So then I try
Yeah.
to get more of them.
Right. Exactly. And that becomes the game. And that game is a lot of fun. That back and forth.
Yeah, because you're engaged even
Right.
more. Not just that you're paying it, but you feel like, and I think as you should, but you feel like you have some more ownership of the story.
Right.
And I think maybe is that the kind of the point of, so to speak, narrative advancement is that working together to build the story that, yes, the main story is we're traveling to Mount Doom to fight the evil overlord Diddlywop, but sharing the story along the way and having, your character, whatever is, I don't know. I know what I'm thinking. I'm just struggling to actually say it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, maybe that is just the point of the story.
Like the real story is the friends we made along the way.
Right. Yeah. I got you.
You know what I mean? Like, yes, there's the bigger, so to speak, narrative,
Mm-hmm.
but the real, it's kind of like, and well, you're listening to me and Steve, so you're used to tangents and weird relations of things. It's kind of like how you've heard me talk about the bonds mechanic in Delta Green, right? The bonds mechanic has jack crap to do with the main campaign, really.
Right.
But to me, that is the core of campaign. To me, that is the core of campaign play in that system because it reflects the toll that dealing with all the crap that these agents are seeing, all the weird, screwed up crap, the toll that it takes on them in their relationships with other people.
Right. Yeah,
And
that's well, that and then like the carrying that through and then the narrative stuff in the rule book around, you know, a a character that you're carrying over from previous campaigns or previous adventures.
mhm.
Like that's really cool. I really really like that. And I think maybe that's like that's a tool, that's a written rule that you could point to as the exact example of this and be like, this is how this is done right.
Yes, thank you. Because I remember that was one of those things that I remember when we talked with Ken Hite and we were talking about various things. And that was one thing that he gleefully pointed out that he had stolen from Greg Stolze for Fall of Delta Green.
Right.
And like I think for really when you see something that another accomplished game designer went, yes, I took that from this person. That's kind of saying, that is just this beautiful little nugget of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, yeah, that like you said, that's kind of the example to point to of this is what you're going for, whether you have stats for it or not.
Right.
And the use of that mechanic is simply a way to reduce, in that system, it's still called sanity. But it basically what it allows you to do is project some of that stress onto a relationship instead of dealing with it with the creature monster situation in front of you.
Right. It reflects a little bit like it reflects reality, which is what that game is meant to do.
Right.
Somebody wouldn't just suck it up and deal with that forever. It would wear at them and beat them down.
Right. So I mean,
you know.
maybe that's kind of what you're going for, right? Is to think about, what does spending 2 weeks, slogging through some giant, dungeon, how does that make your character relate differently to the rest of the world? Or to, take another, and this one's a little fresh in my mind just because, well, I'll get to that in a second, but think of, as a more current real life example, think of, I'm sure most of us know someone who is, say, an Afghan war veteran, and some of them have real troubles readapting to civilian life. That was, my wife and I have been binging old seasons of Survivor.
Right.
And we just finished up the one where the guy who won was a Marine Afghan combat vet. And he talked about, how part of the reason he went on the show was to kind of force himself to relearn some of those social skills and see if he could do it, but also to do that in a place where other vets could see that and go, okay, yeah, we can do this too.
Right.
I have, I haven't talked with him much in a few years, but I used to have a pretty good friend that was, also a combat vet. And yeah, there were just different things, the way they interact with people, the way, like, he would subconsciously stand at parade rest all the time.
Mm-hmm.
He wouldn't even realize he was doing it.
Yeah.
And I think and I think you need to be careful that you're not doing things that kind of cheapen anyone else's experience, but kind of taking that as an example of something. Does your character, I don't know, did they, are they paranoid about certain things
Right.
in
Yeah.
certain conditions because X, Y, and Z happened repeatedly to them in adventures?
Right.
Or, I mean, you could even take it more in a comedic route, right? That, just because of an absurdly lucky roll or something, they now believe that certain situations can't hurt them. You know what I mean? Like, just, you know what I mean? We've all had those circumstances where your character got obnoxiously lucky and something didn't hurt them that really should have. So do you have some fun with that and now have your character believe that,
Yeah, they're impervious to this and they're not. I think that's funny. I always enjoy doing that. I do that when I play like dumb characters or traditionally dumb characters. I do that. Like if I like do super well during a combat, he just gets so full of himself.
yeah. Or do you have a character that develops a superstition regarding a certain piece of gear they have?
Right.
That maybe there's nothing and certain systems have some, I think at least the older editions of Earth Dawn had mechanics where the longer you carried a weapon, it started developing properties. So like, just because, it may have, when you first got it, just been a regular great axe.
Right.
But now that you've adventured with it for, so long, now it does certain things, whether that's just in your head or, you know what I mean?
It's actually happening. Yeah. That's neat.
But stuff like that would be, like it's your rogue's lucky dagger.
Right.
Maybe nothing special. It might be, again, D&D terms, it might just be a +1 dagger, but he thinks it's his lucky dagger. Stuff like that I think could be fun to play with. And you know what I mean?
I think it could be fun to play with. I think you could tell a really interesting story with that stuff and get your players really involved in it, and your players being involved in the story is engagement, and engagement is a good thing. I mean, it's just period at the end of the day.
But I think, and I think I mentioned this before, but I think a lot of this too goes to just make your world alive as a GM.
Yeah, don't do a two-dimensional world. I think it's funny. My players like to tell me how much they really enjoy me as a storyteller, and I don't like tooting my own horn. I really don't. I don't think I'm that great. I leave my world sort of vague. But the one feedback that I always get is, "Oh man, I love how you bring these characters." And I'm like, "You tell me what characters live here." And like define what it may roughly look like, but if they're looking for a blacksmith, there is going to be a blacksmith, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
maybe there isn't a blacksmith and maybe I'm doing that for a purpose, right? But
Mm-hmm.
my players define, and it's like, yeah, and having a living world where they walk into a tavern, is it full or is it empty? Well, if you define what a full tavern looks like and then proceed to define an empty tavern, the emptiness sort of adds a little bit of ambience, like
Mm-hmm.
adds a little bit to the, why is the tavern empty?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Right. Well, I think too, though, in a living world now, the actions that you choose to take can mean, or let me rewind that a second. The action you choose not to take can be as important as the action you choose to take.
Right.
And so, in making that world alive, where things happen, not just where your players are,
Right,
you know,
exactly.
and
Yeah,
there,
I've been doing that in my D&D campaign. Has been they leave a place if they run from somewhere and they're like, okay, we're just going to leave it and come back later. That place may not be the same as what it was when you left, and it
Mhm.
probably won't be.
Yeah.
So
And I don't know where this fits in, but I'm going
I
to
don't know.
relate something that is come into my mind because of this. And this was Liam from Mud and Blood loves to talk about this. That something that a friend of his who GM'd a campaign for them did. They were playing this, I think it was Warhammer Second Edition, and they were playing this pretty long campaign. And they get to the one session, and the GM passes them out all new character sheets, and they're for these beastmen or whatever. And they were this tribe of, so they played, say, 3 or 4 sessions as these characters who, as they figured out a few more sessions down the road, were actually the leaders of this horde of beastmen that they were going to deal with as their main characters.
Right, right,
And so, he said it just gave so much of a different and interesting perspective, and also just like as a player, it was like, oh, we played these guys. We know how much of a badass they are.
well, and it also gives it some weight.
Yeah.
You realize you go from they're not characters to, oh, I played that guy.
Yeah. And I don't know if that's narrative character advancement, but I think that's a really interesting tool to use in a game.
No, I think it's narrative world advancement at the very least.
Yeah. Like in the story, because it's like, if you think about it, our as the players in an RPG game, I think we're the viewer in the movie, so to speak.
Right.
And this came up actually in a discussion on the Discord, and Instawin was talking about a setup he was going to use in his Star Wars campaign, where there was going to be like this like cut scene. He was going to just read the scenario to his players about this Imperial sergeant, stormtrooper sergeant, whatever, who's almost done with his enlistment. It's got like a week left before he gets to go home and you know do whatever. And then as the adventure itself plays out, they have an encounter with this guy and his squad. And my first thought was, wow, that's a really, really cool thing. But if your players are playing in character, they don't know that story.
Right.
But it's a really cool story.
Oh yeah.
And I know he specifically mentioned he was curious to see if it changed how his players approached the encounter. And I wonder, again, my first thought was if they do, then they're not playing in character. But is that me being, a stick in the mud about, well, what does your character know, as opposed to, are we participating in a story? And I'm not sure there's a right answer.
No, I was gonna say I think I'm not gonna say the right answer, but I think an answer is probably It's okay.
Oh, yeah, like, but you know what I'm saying? But, so I guess part of the question is, why are you playing? You know, are you playing to act out as, you know, Zedek Dishwa, the, you know, Rhodian bounty hunter? Are you playing to contribute the role of Zedek to this greater Star Wars story that we're telling?
Right. Yeah, that's interesting.
I think I just created a whole new show topic on accident.
Yeah, I think so. Well, on that note, I think we go ahead and move into game of the week.
Game of the week. Woohoo!
Game of the week. Game of the week.
All right. I have a game, but do you want to go first?
Sure, I can go first. So, I know you and I have had a couple conversations around at least one, if not more, Facebook posts we saw about people asking, what game should you use to play John Wick?
Did you find a tabletop RPG about finding a tabletop RPG to play John Wick?
Close.
Oh.
Actually, what I did find is that apparently it's still partially in development.
Okay.
But
the John Wick tabletop RPG.
Well, I found a quick start.
Oh, nice.
That specifically cites John Wick as an influence.
Okay.
It's called Outgunned. It says a cinematic action RPG inspired by classics of action and heist, from Die Hard to True Lies, passing through James Bond, Lethal Weapon, Kingsman, Ocean's 11, Hot Fuzz, and the latest John Wick.
That sounds great. That sounds great.
You know, I haven't actually purchased / downloaded it yet. It's technically pay once you want. Suggested price of all of $1 for a 71-page quick start. It's using a game system they call Director's Cut that they say uses small pools of 6-sided dice to determine the outcome of heroes' actions. And when you roll, you're not actually looking to add, like you're not looking for high roll, low roll, whatever. You're looking for 2, 3, 4 of a kind.
Okay. Yahtzee.
Kind of a Yahtzee mechanic, which I think is,
That's
Yahtzee, poker, dice poker. So I don't know a ton about it. It's from a company called Two Little Mice.
Okay.
Looks to be perhaps originally done in Italian. Because the listing is in both languages.
Okay.
At least I believe it's Italian. I know it's not Spanish and it's not French, so maybe it's Portuguese. I don't know. Here, let me show you send you the link. Oh, wrong window. Where are we at? No, there we go. But yeah, it might be the answer to play that John Wick. Let's be honest, Lethal Weapon could be kind of fun too.
Yeah, I look at this cover and immediately my brain goes to Red. Do you remember the film franchise Red with
I do.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
But I don't know that I've seen. I think I actually own Red 2 on DVD, but I've never seen Red 1.
Oh.
But I don't think I've ever watched Red 2 either. Oh, the other one, The Expendables.
Yeah, The Expendables is a good one. Red's kind of a comedy Expendables, but it's got just as many, like, it's got legitimate actors. Like, it's got Bruce Willis and all these characters. And Red's, like, I really enjoyed that first Red movie.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what this reminds me of. But yeah, that looks really cool. All right, well, moving on to mine, unless you have more thoughts.
Not per se. The other thing that I don't know if to cover art. What was that one? And I've only seen part of it, but the one where Angelina Jolie does that stupid thing where she arcs the bullet around the chamber.
Wanted. Yeah, that was one of those early, late 2000s comic book movies. That's not a great film.
Yeah, that was the kind of the impression I got. But
all right.
Okay.
So I have a 2-pager, pay what you want, called Clean Out Your Desk.
Okay.
Well, it's actually 1 page. So it's a 1-page RPG designed for gaming over web calls from your desk at home. The premise is that you've been fired and are out for comedic revenge, but only have access to the things that are on your actual real life desk.
This is a dangerous game for people to play with people like you and me.
I know, but it looks
Actually, probably
so
most
fun.
gamer people.
Yeah, it
Because, like,
looks.
I mean, you know, I've got this weird corkscrew thingy here.
Oh yeah, I got stuff laying everywhere. I got a crescent wrench here because I couldn't get the coaxial connection off my modem the other day.
Got a couple of padlocks. Well, here I have a used compression end for a coax cable,
There you go.
but there's no cable in it. I must have been testing out my end putter
Printer.
on thingies.
Yeah.
We've got a bunch of like little clippy things.
Yeah. No, it's
Actually, you want to see the weird thing that's handy to my desk?
What's that? Copy of riffs? Oh,
No, my
nice.
Scooby-Doo soap dispenser.
Nice. Yeah, this just looks like a good time. I'm sorry. This just looks fun.
That's definitely. I'm definitely going to have to look that one up and wow.
Yeah.
Someone's going to have to run this with our Monday night group.
Oh, I know. I got to figure out. I'm gonna read it when I get off here and figure it out.
Because I don't even want to think about the stuff that's going to come up on the desks of these people.
Oh man. It's just not. This is gonna be a good time. We got to make sure we record it.
Oh,
but yeah, that's that. And with all that being said, I want to thank everyone for listening.
yes.
As always, links to everything are in the show notes. Facebook, Discord, Twitter, Patreon. As you've heard, if you're a Patreon guest, you do get a couple little bonus things. So maybe check us out there.
Mm-hmm. I have a Patreon episode about halfway done.
Okay. I have one that I started and haven't gotten back to yet. Yeah, and as always, links to everything. Said that already. Remind you to be kind to one another and get out there and play some RPGs.
Yep. Take care, y'all.
Intro and outro music by the band 12 Noon. You can email us at meandsteverpg@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter and RPGs. Find us on Facebook at Me and Steve RPG Podcast. On Discord at Me and Steve RPGs. And as always, all of these links are in the show notes. Thank you, and be kind to one another.
How much for the cigar?
Cigar, $20, dog. You gotta go down the street to the store and buy that.